Yeah, so I'll just give a condensed version of sort of how I got here. So I'm actually from the Midwest. I'm from St. Louis. I was backpacking for 5 years on and off to different areas of the world. And like while I was doing all this traveling, I was like hitchhiking and sleeping on people's couches, and I decided to learn data science. So my background is actually in academia and linguistics. I have like formal training as a linguist and research developer, et cetera, et cetera. I just wanted to add statistics on top of that, and I always knew that I wanted to get into data science. So I started taking edX classes online, actually, for about 9 months, maybe about half time. And like when I had decided that I had had enough of traveling, I went to Prague, and I was like, I really want to stay here. And I just sort of like landed in this position where I found space in the NLP world. So I get to combine my two great loves, which are a language, natural language, and programming and statistics and stuff. So that's how I ended up here. So for CoronaWhy, for those of you who don't know what CoronaWhy is, actually it's part of my presentation, so I guess I can talk about that whenever that starts. Should I start presenting now, or?
That was my plan.
Cool. Okay.
Although I do like seeing everybody's face, and when you present, I won't be able to see everybody's face, but that's okay. You are a co-host, so you should be able to see share screen in the bottom. Yeah, with a green button.
Gotcha.
Perfect.
How does that look for people?
Looks good.
Cool. Okay, like I said, my name is Brandon. I work at Deloitte Central Europe in the Prague office in the Czech Republic, and I started with CoronaWhy a couple of months ago. And CoronaWhy is just this international group of people who wanted to volunteer time to make data more accessible to people who needed it related to the coronavirus epidemic. So today I'm just going to talk about briefly about the project, about CoronaWhy, what we're doing, and then I'll go into like the cool data sciencey stuff. Because I work with the unstructured data, it's mainly an NLP problem for many of our verticals. And then for the end, I'll just have a call to action in case anybody else wants to join us. Okay. Oh, and if you have any questions, please do raise your hand. I don't know if I'm going to see it, but I guess we have a Q&A afterwards, but please, if I'm speaking too fast or if you have a question, do let me know. I'm happy to answer questions. So the project started with Kaggle. Kaggle created this competition for taking part in a coronavirus-related data challenge, which was answering 10 key questions or tasks related to the coronavirus epidemic. They partnered with the Allen Institute for AI, or AI2, and a few other organizations to curate a large set of research papers related to coronavirus, or vaguely or immediately related to coronavirus, and challenged the data science community to create ways to make the data less unstructured, more clean, and more accessible for researchers and for medical professionals who might need to get that information more quickly than reading through 57,000 research papers would take one person. So that is how we started. Our team started off with like probably 70 people. It grew to over 900. I think there's more than 1,000 people in the group at the moment. I would say there's probably about 150 really active people at the moment. But it's really people from everywhere, from very diverse backgrounds, speaking different languages, but mainly English. We have different specializations, different skills, different time schedules, which has been a real challenge. And let's see if I can stop this from, okay, we're good. So we have different silos. Some people are project managers, some people do the data science, we have graphic designers, people who work on the website, etc. And I'm in this little square down here, natural language processing. I sort of do like the background natural language processing, the pre-processing of all the papers to make it more digestible for downstream tasks in machine learning. And I also do some data set curation, so listing data sets and keeping people up to date on the location of that data and versioning and stuff. Now we actually have some really cool people that are leading that charge. People from Harvard, people from NASA Jet Propulsion Labs, we have a really, really cool group of people. And we're broken up into teams based on tasks, or that's at least one of the ways that we divvy ourselves up. Some of the tasks are related to risk factors or the geography, so places and how climate affects virality, how the methods of transmission, and epidemiology. We have another work stream for vaccine and therapeutics. And all of these different questions are related, but they require very different skills and very different information that may end up in the same documents. So some people are being shared between the teams. Some of them are only on one task, but that's how we're working. And as far as all the tech stack that is concerned and all of the resources that we're using, we have so much support from different platforms. So we have Google Cloud, we have EZP, which is Canada-based. AWS has given us, has provisioned some resources for us. Slack gave us our license to use it on a ad infinitum, I guess. And we use Trello pretty heavily. And for tech, we're really all over the place. I think most people work in Python, some people work in R. We have people working on Apache Tika, which is like a large scale data ingestion pipeline. CTAKES is like the medical version of Apache Tika, to simplify a bit. And yeah, so we have this full organizational structure. We have all of these different workflows planned out, support from different people and companies and technologies. And what we're creating is not just one thing, but it's really, it's all over the place. We're creating methods to create an organizational structure and make search engines, visualizations, et cetera, to make that data more ingestible. So the cooperation really, I want to stress that, like, we are not here to answer questions about coronavirus. We are only here to sort of make the data more ingestible to people that actually need it and would know how to do it. So we do have subject matter experts in CoronaWhy, which are epidemiologists, doctors. We have grad students in biology, stuff like this, that provide us data scientists with insight. What data do they need? How can we help them to better go over this data? What does it need to look like? How can we get people to use it? How can we make an impact? And then we have the AI practitioners, which our attempt is to fill in those pieces and make it easier, make their lives easier, and hopefully affect some kind of positive change. All right, so that's nice. What about the artificial intelligence? So I'll get to that point now. With biomedical text, it's a little bit different than working with normal text. So I don't know how familiar all of you are with natural language processing or data science, but generally you want to clean your text and turn words into features or model them using some kind of transformer model and train machine learning models on top of that, or do some kind of text extraction algorithm. But most of the natural language processing models that exist at this point are really focused on like news articles or generic text or business text. And the type of language that's used in biomedical text, biomedical research papers, is much different than what you would find in a news article about a news article about COVID, for example. So one of the steps of pre-processing text is what we call tokenization or lemmatization, which breaks up words into their definition, or sorry, their dictionary forms, more or less, where typically you would take punctuation out and you have all these chemical names like, or sorry, you have different named entities like proteins, diseases, et cetera, that have dashes in them or periods or parentheses. And those are typically destroyed in a natural language processing pipeline because the punctuation is removed. So one of the challenges is to preserve all of those tokens as features in a biomedical text while still retaining the ability to break it text down into its individual tokens. Normal language models don't parse biomedical text well, primarily affecting named entity recognition, which is the extraction of people, places, particular concepts, something special that isn't just a function word like from or of. Biomedical texts are full of acronyms. There are so many acronyms in biomedical texts, and processing those is not the same as processing the actual full-on form of a particular concept. Jargon isn't included in most natural language processing models. So given a generic spacey model, it's not going to understand what COVID-19 is. It's not going to know what MERS or SARS are, certainly not in context. We have papers that generally follow a linear pattern of organizational structure, meaning that you have like an introduction, methodology, et cetera, which is a nice quality to have for someone trying to derive the structure of a text and use those features as some kind of predictive input. And then analysis and extraction of relevant information requires subject matter expertise. So anybody can read the news, or we would hope that anybody could read the news. Not everybody is scientifically literate. Not everyone can read scientific papers, let alone about epidemiology or virology. And we really do rely on subject matter experts for decent pre-processing of these types of texts, or any type of subject specific text. So dealing with those challenges comes in phases. So one of the things that we've developed is this entire pipeline for changing the text in a biomedical research paper into something more manageable from a data science perspective. So we have a SciSpacey, or Science Spacey, which is a natural language processing toolkit released by, the models are released by Allen AI. They were trained on biomedical texts so that they can more robustly understand the syntax, named entities, and the context of biomedical terms and sentences. We use that for named entity recognition, which is, like I said, it's extracting all the concepts. We also have a part of the pipeline that expands acronyms. I'm starting to lose my English. I've been here too long. And all those named entities are canonicalized by lookup in the Universal Medical Language System. So you might have an acronym and a different expanded term that both refer to the same concept, like H2O and ice, for example, but those would be normalized as water or something, for example. That expanded text is saved for further processing, so it's basically reprocessed. And we have vectorized outputs that are saved via a pre-trained word-to-vec model. Spacey models and generally prior to transformer models being available, language models looked at the co-occurrence of words in context, just as a bag of words. So you take all this entire document, tokenize it, put it in, and then find the statistical distribution of words in context with each other. Transformer models like BERT or GPT or whatever else, Roberta, BERT flavored models, learn this bidirectionally, but it's really computationally intensive. So the first part of this process is relying on word-to-vec. After that, you do whatever NLP stuff you want on top of it. Building cluster models, k-means, TF-IDF, what have you, getting keywords, etc. So one of the things that I thought was interesting that you can do is whenever you come out with some kind of new vocabulary, because these language models are trained on the context of words around them, you get this like vectorized representation, which is like 300 numbers. Essentially, it's a numeric representation of the meaning of a word, in theory, or of a sentence. But COVID is new, and language models aren't trained on new language constantly. So in a real pinch, I would not recommend doing this, but in a real pinch, you can give compositional vectors to these language models. So by using words that would typically occur in their context, like a definition, you can average the vectors of all of those individual tokens to get a compositional vector for whatever terms you're using. And this is important for later steps in the pipeline, as I'll discuss soon. So that was something that I did. And this is why it becomes important. So one of the things that I wanted to build was a semantic search engine, or that we wanted to build as a semantic search engine, where typically when you're looking through texts, you look for keywords. You search for the word COVID-19. Anywhere where the word COVID-19 occurs, that would be highlighted. It comes up as relevant, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't always work because it's not going to look for that word in other languages. For example, if I were looking for water, but I really wanted water and agua and water in a bunch of other languages, I want that to be relevant as well. Using embeddings can sort of give us a shortcut around that. Because if you imagine embeddings being the numeric representation of the meaning, if your model has been trained on multiple languages, then that meaning is represented in the same way regardless of the language, or in theory it is. So if you vectorize all of the sentences in the entire corpus, and then you vectorize some kind of query like a statement or something, like specimens were tested on site by a multiplex PCR, blah, 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 then your model in theory should understand, because it was trained on biomedical text, what the approximate meaning of that is in a numeric vector. Then you just measure the distance between that vector and other vectors, and you get some rudimentary measure of the similarity of meaning of those two sentences. Then you can rank them by relevance and turn that into an entire service. Yeah. So along those lines, this is essentially what you're looking for, like you take like the Euclidean distance between the three vectors. I just wanted to show sort of what this looks like, where we're looking at the similarity between COVID-19 and novel coronavirus, and we have something that's like 0.54. These scores are normalized between 0 and 1, and we're looking for something higher than like 0.01, which would be completely irrelevant. So at least it's working. We knew that much. We do classification models with vectors where sometimes the data is really messy, where at one point we actually didn't have a distinction between like an abstract and an introduction, or an abstract and a title. And using vectors as representations or input for a machine learning model, it can come up with some really cool capabilities. So just train it, like super simple training in sklearn on the vectors of different titles and abstracts. You can get, I think I got like a 96% accuracy rate or something for determining it with 84% recall. It was really cool. I don't want to spend too much time talking about it, but suffice it to say that vectors can be used as numeric input the same way that you would use any other particular feature. But this only works if what you're measuring is, or training a model on, is the difference in meaning between two texts. So this doesn't work when you want to do something like measuring the semantic difference between title, introduction, methods, results, discussion, blah, blah, blah. The reason for this is that within a research text, the actual subject is usually repeated throughout every single section. And not only is it repeated, but it's explained in different ways that all sort of come together into the same meaning. And the more stuff that you sort of put through one of these language models will make the vectors less representative of a particular text. So if you have an entire document that goes from beginning to end, and you're only averaging the average of all the vectors of every single token in that model, you just get this blob that doesn't really represent the document very well. But in order to have an effective search engine for people who need information from these research texts, you need to be able to search at three levels, where it's the sentence, the section level, if you need something a little bit more general but still specific, and then the document level. The problem with document level embeddings, like I said, is that you just get this blah if you're only using vectorized representations based on the semantic content of that paper. So the Allen Institute for, AI2, Allen Institute for AI, came up with this novel way of representing documents based on not just the semantic content of the paper, but also on the citation graph. So papers that share citations with other papers, or where the citations largely overlap, can be considered more similar to each other. So I really encourage you, if you're into this kind of stuff, to read the paper. It's really fascinating. And it was made in response to people who needed to work with these documents. So they call it SPECTER, and these SPECTER embeddings are provided as part of our data set. And so I set out to sort of see if there's any underlying structure, not just in the documents themselves, but also that we could label that onto onto the documents, because we really wanted labels. We wanted some kind of structure in the documents where people are, asking, what is the topic of this paper, without having to read it. So what I did was basically take all these really high level or high dimensional embeddings. I think they're like 1,000 dimensions or something, 768 maybe. You do some k-means, measure the stability of each one of the clusters that it creates. This is called the elbow method right here, if any of you are familiar. And it looked like the best measurement of the number of clusters that we had in the SPECTER embeddings was about 7. So then you can create something that looks like this on the right, where a UMAP visualization tries to take really high dimensional data and then squash it down into 2 or 3 dimensions. And as we can see here, like the lines in between the clusters aren't actually shared citations, but they're actually shared dimensions. So data points that are similar to each other in some dimension, but more similar to each other within the cluster. And we really see this nice separation of 7 different clusters. So I was really happy with this. Since we didn't have any labeled data, I wanted to generate labeled data from this. So then the next idea is, okay, so we have this numeric representation of shared citations and similarity between documents, but what does that mean? So then you have to look at the words. I apologize if this is a little bit small. So I wanted to apply this to TF-IDF, which is another representation of words in documents. It's called term frequency inverse document frequency. It gives you a score for each one of the tokens in a paper and its relative importance to that paper as a distinctive feature. Using that information, you can estimate some underlying topics within the text or within your corpus. That's called latent Dirichlet allocation, where it tries to give you a distribution of the topics and how those topics are represented in the corpus. Unfortunately, when you apply k-means to TF-IDF, it's not really the same as applying LDA. So they're both clustering algorithms, but they do 2 entirely separate things. And we can actually see this on the left, where what we really want to see on this blue line is a steep decrease and then a smoothing out. But it almost looks like a linear decrease, which means that any clusters that we form on here are probably not going to be well formed. And that also means that k-means is not really picking up on what we want it to pick up on, which is some kind of underlying meaning or underlying structure in our corpus. LDA is really good for doing this with text data, so that's why I went with that. But you have to be careful, because generally, even after you have these nicely separated clusters in LDA, when you go back to label all of your documents, it can be very, very unbalanced. So some of the words really take over, and since they're so common amongst all of the documents, you have to normalize afterwards, otherwise you'll get a really skewed distribution. So then I took all of those clusters that I got from LDA, and I mapped them onto from the SPECTER embeddings. So we have 7 different clusters, remember, in the SPECTER embeddings, and this is a visualization of the TF-IDF space, so that that data that's actually based on the word counts and distribution of words across documents. And it's really exciting to see this, because we have some kind of structure, which means that in these nice grouped areas, we're seeing, essentially what we're seeing is the 7 clusters that we had that had nothing to do with the words in the documents, but just with the interrelatedness of the documents. And the space that we're mapping it onto is the space of term frequencies smushed down to 2 dimensions. And the colors represent those clusters from SPECTER. And the fact that we have any structure here at all suggests that we should be able to apply some measure of topic distribution to the SPECTER embeddings, which means that something is working well, and it's really cool. It would take me a really long time to explain everything here, and I'm sorry for talking so quickly, but I'm happy to answer questions later. And at the moment, we're still looking for people to help, people in machine learning, management, etc. I'm sure that I've gone over time, so I'm just going to say thank you very much for having me, and that's me.